This talk is going to be about the inventor John Worrell Keely. Some of you all know the name, especially if you've read your Secret Doctrine, as Helena Blavatsky devoted a whole chapter to him in the Secret Doctrine. It is chapter 10, or chapter X as it is marked, which is of interest to us for this presentation. This chapter is about Keely and about occult science and the mystery of the machines that Keely had developed. So who was John Worrell Keely? Well, he was an American born in Philadelphia on the 3rd of September 1837, and he died in that same city on the 18th of November 1898. He had a number of roles in different careers, such which included investigating fraudulent mediums in the spiritual circles of that day. It was in his later years that he came across the role that was to intrigue Helena Blavatsky to write about him. He became an inventor of strange machines that could capture a mysterious force, a force that seemed to be created out of nothing, yet he believed it was the ether. Keely said this unknown force was distinct from electricity and magnetism, and he was adamant that it was the ether, that with his machines he was able to imprison the ether and also to be able to release the ether. So he was born in Philadelphia and he lived there for most of his life when he passed away in 1898, as I said. He was the founder of the Keely Motor Company, which promulgated his many inventions and where he could work on his machines, all of which had a bit of an obscurity about them. These machines produced unlimited energy, but they did not work with steam or electricity, oil or petroleum. They worked via mysterious energy, which Keely called sympathetic vibrations. What was even odder about his machines was that they only worked when he operated them. It was as though he had the magic touch that would set them off. We shall come to this in a moment. First, a little more biography. As a child, Keely had an interest in sound and vibration, and he soon realised that they had a connection. There are a few versions of how he came to this conclusion. One such story is that as a child he noticed that when a wagon rolled past his house, the glass windows would vibrate and would continue to vibrate for a while after the wagon had passed. He called this sympathetic vibration, and he used this term when he described how his unlimited energy producing machines worked. He said, "My system, in every part and details, both in the developing of this power and in every branch of its utilisation, is based and founded on sympathetic vibration, or sympathetic vibration physics, as it is now known." Keely describes how a vibrationary motion is present in every object, and that this vibration can be influenced by sound. Keely looked into sounds and musical chords and the effect they had on objects. He was a musician and played with the local orchestra, so he already had an understanding of musical harmonies. What he was looking for was the force that was created with the sound vibrations. He realised that it was an unseen force, and he set out with his machines to harness it. This force that he harnessed, he realised, was a new type of energy, which he called simply the force, which many people now call the ether. The Collins English Dictionary refers to the ether as the hypothetical medium formerly believed to fill all space and to support the propagation of electromagnetic waves. Keely was drawing energy from the ether. He was collecting ether and producing energy from the atmosphere using vibration and sound. He regarded this as working with the natural laws of nature, a merging of natural and universal laws with his machines to create a free, unlimited energy. The Keely motor is what he was known for in his time. This machine was a dissipating motor that was also a generator that once set off produced unlimited energy. He patented it in 1872, and people came from far and wide to see it. But nobody understood how it worked. Even the wizards of electricity, Nikola Tesla and Thomas Edison, came to visit him and see his machines. It could be seen that it was used for various principles of hydrodynamics, mechanics and vibration physics. But how it worked baffled many people, especially since Keely was very secretive about his workings. Another big problem was that the machines only worked when Keely was around. Though he says he discovered the force, he also was the force. He made the machines work through himself, either using his willpower or because he was in some way attuned to the ether, so that he, or his will, vibrated in tune with what he was working on. His own magnetism aided the machines in their operation. Helena Blavatsky shines a light on Keely's machines in her chapter on him in The Secret Doctrine, where she compares his work to the lost technology of the ancient civilizations, writing about this energy being named by the Atlanteans Mashmak, and by the Aryan Rishis in their Ashtavidya by a name that we do not like to give. It is the vril of Buller Luton's coming race, and of the coming races of our mankind. The discovery in its completeness is by several thousand, or shall we say 100,000 years too premature. Yet she also gives a warning in this chapter about the machines. Keely's discovery would lead to a knowledge of one of the most occult secrets, a secret which can never be allowed to fall into the hands of the masses. Now, how did Blavatsky get to know about Keely and his inventions? She never met him in person and did not correspond with him via letters. How did she hear of him? Well, whilst living in London, she was often visited upon, and visited herself upon, another lady living there, a woman who was the most loyal supporter of John Worrell Keely. This woman was Clara Bloomfield Moore. A short bio of Clara Bloomfield Moore. She was born in 1824. She died in 1899, a year after Keely. She was born in Massachusetts to the Jessup family, moved to Philadelphia when she married, then moved to London after the death of her husband, Bloomfield Haynes Moore. Clara Bloomfield Moore knew Keely while she resided in Philadelphia, and she is the one who kept a record of his work. She wrote the book Keely and His Discoveries, Aerial Navigation. It was her interest in the ether that brought her to Keely. She was also the author of a book entitled Social Ethics and Social Duties, as well as releasing a book of her own poetry. Bloomfield Moore said that atoms contain a certain amount of primitive intelligence. This is what Keely was working with, intelligence in forces. He used a mixture of sound and energy to make his machines operate. He called this sympathetic vibratory physics. Keely was using sound and vibration. He said that sound was a signal for delivering information, so by transmitting sound one was sending a message. Keely understood or seemed able to work vibratory sound, the sympathetic vibratory physics. He could play a violin that was at the same vibration of a machine, and that sound would set the machine to work. One of his contraptions that was seen to work with sound was the following. He had a glass globe that balanced on a platinum pivot. Keely could make the globe on the pivot spin by playing a note from his violin. The sound vibrations are tuned with the globe and will cause it to spin on the pivot. To stop it spinning, Keely would play a discordant chord on the violin, and the globe would come to a halt. Blavatsky wrote in The Secret Doctrine, "For sound generates, or rather attracts together, the elements that produce an ozone, the fabrication of which is beyond chemistry, but within the limits of alchemy. It may even resurrect a man or an animal whose astral vital body has not been irreparably separated from the physical body by the severance of the magnetic or odic cord. As one saved thrice from death by that power, the writer ought to be credited with knowing personally something about it." Now we must remember the third object of the Theosophical Society: to investigate the secret operations of nature under every possible aspect, and especially the mental, psychic and spiritual powers always present, but not always apparent or working in human beings. Because of this, various Theosophical Society groups became intrigued with Keely and his machines. In 1896, Keely displayed his machines at the Theosophical Conference held in New York. This was being run by the acting Theosophical Society president J.D. Buck, who later wrote about Keely, saying, J.E.W. Keely seems to combine the intuitions of a seer with the practical knowledge of mechanics, and is at once a scientist and a philosopher. And the English Theosophical president Hargrove compared Keely with the ancient Egyptian scribes and priests who had an understanding of vibratory energies and sound, and what would today be thought of as magic. Keely never met the inventor Nikola Tesla, but Tesla knew of his work and was a friend of Clara Bloomfield Moore. In one of the letters from Tesla to Mrs. Bloomfield Moore, Tesla wrote about Keely and his machines, which he found the methods of how they worked quite baffling. He wrote, I sincerely wish that I could share your opinion about Keely and his works. That he has ingenuity and skill in experimenting I will readily believe. But his method is an unscientific one, and his exposition is wanting in the extreme. It is painful to read his theories. Can he have recognised something and yet be utterly incapable of expressing it? So Tesla could not see what made the machines work, but Tesla was a very rational man who came with an intellectual opinion. Maybe Keely didn't know how it worked, which was why he was vague at explaining it. Clara Bloomfield Moore writes in her book Keely and His Discoveries, Keely is giving birth to a system. Then later in the same paragraph she writes, conflicting with modern science at very many points, visionary as both appear to be, powerful expression is given to an idea of life both in the macrocosm and the microcosm, the validity of which can be questioned only by materialism. Keely wanted to utilise the force that he believed existed in the vibrations of the universal ether, a force that only he seemed able to work with. He called it the vitalising force. Franz Hartmann, a friend of Blavatsky, became president of the German Theosophical Society branch in 1896. Before this, back in 1888, he was in America and visited upon Keely. He was already acquainted with Bloomfield Moore, and that is probably how he heard about Keely's machines. Hartmann had heard about Keely's machine in 1882, and he wrote that Keely's new vibratory force will be the future as steam power is replaced by electricity and magnetism, and then finally the vibratory force of Keely. Though he did add that this would be when the time was ripe, which is also what Blavatsky alludes to in her chapter on Keely in The Secret Doctrine. The time is now not right. Hartmann told Bloomfield Moore that he recognised that for Keely's machine to work, that they needed a man such as Keely, as a person who had a constitution akin to him to get the machinery into motion. Yet Keely himself disagreed with Hartmann, saying, Dr. Hartmann's whole conception in regard to other men being unable to control the operations of my inventions on the sympathetic attractive system is as incorrect as would be the same conception in reference to operating an electric battery by anyone but its inventor. One has to wonder why Keely was not aware that it only worked when he was operating it. Or was he aware of this but could not acknowledge it because who would fund his work if nobody else could operate the system but him? As Bloomfield Moore writes, no man whose spiritual eyes have been opened to discern the signs of the times can doubt that we are on the eve of revelations which are to usher in the dawn of a brighter day than our race has yet known. Yet that brighter day has not come, not regarding these natural forces that work as Keely promised, or as that Hartmann and Blavatsky envisaged. After his death, Keely's workshop was inspected by various detractors of his work, the main problem being that nobody could make his machines work, and rumours started to abound that all his claims were bogus, and there were accusations that he was a trickster who had hidden pneumatic machinery under his floorboards or behind his walls, that when activated made it look like the machines in the workshop were working with the special forces. In August 1899, Henry Olcott wrote an article for the Theosophist, volume 20, number 11, about Keely and the people who were saying he was a con artist, and had proof that all of his work was fraudulent. Olcott wanted to defend Blavatsky in her writings on Keely. She obviously was an advocate for this man and his machines, but since they were being proven as fraudulent, and I say this in quotes, Olcott felt he had to defend the Theosophical Society. Acknowledging that Keely's etheric force was a complete swindle, he wrote the following: HBB and the Keely force. Since the first forms of this number of the Theosophists were run off, I have received a copy of a document addressed to the General Secretary of our European section by certain of our French colleagues, and demanding the reason why the now discredited discovery of an etheric force by the late John Worrell Keely was treated in the secret doctrine as a great fact, whereas it was a complete swindle, and how far this contradicts the declaration that that book was inspired, directed and corrected by the Masters of Wisdom. For my part, I have no difficulty whatever in answering if Madame Blavatsky had ever pretended that the contents of the book in question, or any other book, hers or anybody else's, were received as a whole from the personages in question. She would have told an untruth, and all the evil consequences of such a treason would fall on her own head. But she does not say that in her explanatory preface or in the introduction to the secret doctrine. She says that she takes all the responsibility for what is contained in the work, that it has many shortcomings she is fully aware. All that she claims for it is that, romantic as it may seem to many, its logical coherence and consistency entitle it to rank, at any rate, on a level with the working hypotheses so freely accepted by modern science. Further, it claims consideration not by reason of any appeal to dogmatic authority, but because it closely adheres to nature and follows the laws of uniformity and analogy. Now, it is a fact that she has made a very great many mistakes in her books. Mistakes in fact, in science, in history, in literary quotations, in authors' names, in pages, and as Mrs. Besant says in her preface to the third volume of the Secret Doctrine, it contains many statements based on exoteric writings, not on esoteric knowledge. And she warns the reader that much to them is certainly erroneous. What HBB writes about Keely and the new force which he was declared to have discovered comes within this category. Of her own knowledge, she knew nothing about Keely and the validity of his pretences. She got her facts at second and third hand from Mrs. Bloomfield Moore, M.R. Evans, and other old patrons of Keely. She took it for granted that he had done the things reported, and in this slipshod scientific fashion went on to discuss genuinely and expound the finer forces of nature as she knew them to exist, as she had been taught about them by the masters, as she had learnt about them by practical experimentation. All the wonderful phenomena she showed me and others were produced by the employment of those forces. Her mistake was that she never took the trouble to verify the assertions made by her ignorant, if well-meaning, third parties, and not being a soundly educated person, and as ignorant as a baby of scientific literature and the progress of scientific discovery, galloped off on her Pegasus towards the high levels of nature, where she was perfectly at home and where none of us could follow her. Olcott then writes in the same article, but the judicial mind will find it far easier to believe that, at least in the beginning, Keely possessed some extraordinary psychical powers, however much he may have cheated later, when possibly those forces in him were exhausted, than that he was a scamp throughout. And to defend himself and HPB, he adds, while neither of us had the time, chance, nor inclination to push inquiry to the bottom, the impression left on our minds was that Keely had actually rediscovered that resistless energy of nature which Buller called will. The long subsequent intimate association of HPB with the enthusiastic Mrs. Bloomfield Moore in London, 10 years later, deepened the first conviction, and away sailed my dear colleague into her most interesting and instructive disquisition in the secret doctrine. Olcott obviously felt that he had to defend the society, but maybe he was not aware of the forces that Keely was using, something that HPB was, forces and energies that were before their time. HPB recognised that Keely was unique and ahead of his time. Maybe he was a forerunner of the coming race. HPB wrote in the Secret Doctrine that Keely's motors and forces, such as Worrell-Keely's real power, were a danger in the wrong hands, and so should be concealed for now. She wrote, "The danger was this. Doctrines such as the planetary chain or the seven races at once give a clue to the sevenfold nature of man. For each principle is correlated to a plane, a planet, and a race, and the human principles are, on every plane, correlated to sevenfold occult forces, those of the higher plane being of tremendous power, so that any septenary division at once gives a clue to tremendous occult powers, the abuse of which could cause incalculable evil to humanity." Keely's machines only worked because he was the only one who had the right vibration in himself to make them work. He was attuned to these forces, these etheric forces which he called the etheric centres. In his book, Free Energy Pioneer John Worrell Keely, the author Theosophical calls Keely a techno-occultist, which he was, a man before his time who worked with perhaps unknowingly hidden energies and unknown natural forces to be able to create a power, an energy that could be used for helping the world, or as HPB warns, stop it in its tracks.